Homeless boy asks Sandra Bullock for $1. Keanu Reeves watches and his response shocks everyone. It was a crisp autumn evening in Los Angeles. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange. The sidewalks buzzed with people wrapped up in their busy lives, passing by without much notice of their surroundings. Sandra Bullock, casually dressed in jeans and a hoodie, walked down Sunset Boulevard, enjoying the rare moment of anonymity. She had just finished a quiet dinner at a local cafe, relishing the chance to blend in like any ordinary person. A few steps behind her, Keanu Reeves strolled at a leisurely pace. He had recognized Sandra from a distance, but decided not to disturb her. Instead, he watched with a curious smile as she unknowingly approached an encounter that would leave everyone in awe. On the corner of the street, a young homeless boy, no older than 10, sat cross-legged on a tattered piece of cardboard. His clothes were worn, his face smudged with dirt, but his eyes sparkled with a mixture of hope and innocence. As Sandra passed, the boy hesitated for a moment before summoning the courage to call out. "Miss, do you have $1?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sandra stopped in her tracks. She turned and looked at the boy, noting the sincerity in his eyes. Unlike many who might have ignored him, she crouched down to his level. "Why do you need $1, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice warm and gentle. The boy hesitated. "I just want to buy a little food, and maybe save some for my sister," he admitted. Sandra's heart clenched. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a $20 bill. She pressed it into his small hand and gave him a reassuring smile. "Here, take this. Get something nice for both of you, okay?" The boy's eyes widened. "Are you sure? This is too much." Before Sandra could respond, a deep, familiar voice spoke from behind her. "She's sure." Sandra turned in surprise to see Keanu Reeves standing there, his hands in his pockets, watching the scene unfold. He smiled at the boy before crouching down beside Sandra. "What's your name, kid?" Keanu asked. "Ethan," the boy replied shyly. Keanu nodded thoughtfully, then reached into his wallet. Instead of pulling out just another bill, he handed the boy a crisp $100 note. The boy's jaw dropped. "No way!" he gasped. Keanu grinned. "You can keep the change, but only if you promise me something." Ethan blinked up at him. "What?" Keanu's expression softened. "When you grow up and you see someone who needs help, do what she just did for you," he said, gesturing toward Sandra. Tears welled in Ethan's eyes. He clutched the money tightly, nodding. "I promise." Sandra looked at Keanu with admiration. "You always know how to make an impact, don't you?" she teased. Keanu chuckled. "I just believe kindness comes full circle." As the two stars stood and walked away, Ethan watched them with a newfound sense of hope. That night, he and his sister ate the best meal they'd had in weeks. Years later, Ethan would never forget the lesson he learned that day. And true to his promise, he would one day help someone else, just as Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves had helped him. Because kindness, no matter how small, has the power to change lives. The end. Hope you liked it. Let me know if you want any tweaks. Homeless boy asks Sandra Bullock for $1. Keanu Reeves watches, and his response shocks everyone. Los Angeles never truly slept. The city's bright lights and bustling streets created an illusion of endless opportunity. Yet hidden in the shadows were stories of struggle and survival. One such story belonged to Ethan, a 10-year-old boy who sat on the cold pavement of Sunset Boulevard, hugging his knees. His little sister Lily, no older than 6, dozed beside him, curled up in a thin, worn-out blanket. They had been on the streets for months after their mother disappeared one night and never returned. Ethan had learned to survive the hard way. Some days strangers tossed a few coins into his cup. Other days they ignored him completely. But he never lost hope. That evening, as pedestrians hurried past, Ethan noticed a woman walking toward him. She looked familiar, but he couldn't quite place her face. Her hoodie was pulled over her head, and she wore simple jeans and sneakers. Summoning his courage, he called out, "Miss, do you have $1?" The woman stopped. Instead of walking away like so many others, she turned toward him, her brown eyes filled with warmth. She crouched to his level and smiled. "Why do you need $1, sweetheart?" she asked. Ethan hesitated, feeling ashamed. "I just want to buy a little food, and maybe save some for my sister." The woman's eyes flickered toward Lily, still sleeping. Her face softened. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a $20 bill, pressing it into Ethan's small hand. "Here, take this. Get something good for both of you, okay?" Ethan's eyes widened in shock. "Are you sure? This is a lot of money." Before the woman could reply, a deep, familiar voice spoke behind her. "She's sure." Ethan looked up and gasped. A tall man with slightly messy black hair, wearing a simple leather jacket and jeans, stood there. Even in the dim light, Ethan recognized his face from somewhere. Sandra Bullock turned in surprise. "Keanu?" Keanu Reeves smiled. "Hey, Sandy, fancy meeting you here." Sandra chuckled. "You always pop up at the most unexpected moments." Keanu crouched down beside them and looked at Ethan. "What's your name, kid?" "Ethan," the boy said shyly. Keanu nodded, then reached into his wallet. Instead of handing him just a few dollars, he pulled out a crisp $100 bill. He placed it in Ethan's hand and gently closed the boy's fingers around it. Ethan stared at the bill, stunned. "No way." Keanu smiled. "You can keep the change, but only if you promise me something." Ethan blinked up at him. "What?" Keanu's expression softened. "When you grow up and you see someone who needs help, do what she just did for you." He gestured toward Sandra. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. He clutched the money tightly, nodding. "I promise." Sandra, watching the interaction, felt a lump in her throat. Keanu had always been one of the most genuine people she knew, but seeing this moment unfold made her respect him even more. "Keanu, you're a good man," she said softly. He shrugged with a small smile. "It doesn't take much to be kind." Sandra turned back to Ethan. "Where do you and your sister stay at night?" Ethan hesitated. "Sometimes at the bus stop, sometimes under the bridge." Sandra glanced at Keanu, and without a word they both knew what had to be done. "Come on," Sandra said, holding out a hand. "Let's get you both a warm meal, a night of hope." Sandra and Keanu took Ethan and Lily to a nearby diner. The warmth of the restaurant was a stark contrast to the chilly streets outside. As the kids dug into their burgers and fries, Keanu and Sandra exchanged glances, silently deciding their next move. "Do you have any family?" Keanu asked Ethan. The boy shook his head. "No, just Lily and me." Sandra took a deep breath. "We can't just leave them like this." Keanu nodded. "I know a shelter that can help, but—" He hesitated, then met Sandra's eyes. "Maybe we can do more." Sandra understood instantly. With her connections and Keanu's generosity, they could help change these kids' lives. After dinner they drove the children to a safe shelter. Sandra made a few calls arranging for proper care, while Keanu ensured they had clothes, food, and warm beds for the night. Before parting ways, Ethan hugged Sandra and Keanu tightly. "I won't forget this," he whispered. Keanu knelt down to his level and ruffled his hair. "Just keep your promise, buddy." Years later, 15 years passed. Ethan was no longer a homeless boy. He had worked hard, finished school, and built a life for himself and Lily. He never forgot the two kind strangers who had given him a second chance. One day, Ethan, now a young man, found himself walking in downtown LA when he saw a homeless teenager sitting alone, shivering in the cold. Without hesitation, he walked over, crouched down, and smiled. "Hey, do you need $1?" The boy looked up, surprised. Ethan pulled out a $100 bill and pressed it into the boy's hand. "Just promise me one thing," he said, echoing the words he had once heard. "When you grow up and see someone who needs help, do what someone once did for you." As the boy nodded with tears in his eyes, Ethan smiled, knowing he had kept his promise. Because kindness, no matter how small, has the power to change lives. The end. Hope you like this longer version. Let me know if you want more details added. Homeless boy asks Sandra Bullock for $1. Keanu Reeves watches, and his response shocks everyone. A night that changed everything. Ethan held on tightly to Lily's tiny hand as they stepped into the warm shelter. The place smelled of fresh bread and soup, a comforting contrast to the streets they had called home. Around them, volunteers bustled about offering blankets and warm meals to those in need. Sandra and Keanu stood by the entrance, watching the children settle in. "This is just the start," Sandra whispered. Keanu nodded. "Yeah, but what happens next?" Sandra had already thought about that. I have a friend who runs a foundation for kids in need. I'll make some calls." Over the next few weeks, Sandra and Keanu stayed in touch with Ethan and Lily, ensuring they receive proper care, education, and a safe place to stay. Ethan, for the first time in years, felt hopeful about the future. Years of growth and a promise kept. 15 years passed. Ethan, now a 25-year-old man, stood on the rooftop of a high-rise building in downtown Los Angeles. He adjusted the cuffs of his tailored suit and took a deep breath. Below, the city stretched out before him, the same city that had once been so unforgiving. Beside him, Lily, no longer a helpless child, smiled. "You did it, Ethan." Ethan chuckled. "No, we did it." After being taken in by the foundation Sandra connected them with, Ethan and Lily had worked hard, determined to honor the kindness shown to them. Ethan had graduated with a degree in social work, dedicating his life to helping children in need. And today was the grand opening of his very own youth center, a place for homeless children to find shelter, education, and hope. "You think they'll come?" Lily asked. Ethan smirked. "They're Hollywood legends. They'll make an entrance." A special reunion. Just as he said that, a sleek black car pulled up outside the center. The doors opened and out stepped two familiar figures, Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves. Ethan felt his heart race. It had been years since he last saw them in person, but they hadn't changed much. Sandra still had that warm, motherly smile, and Keanu carried the same humble, easygoing presence. As they entered, Ethan walked forward, his voice steady but emotional. "You actually came." Keanu grinned. "Wouldn't miss it for the world, kid." Sandra pulled Ethan into a tight hug. "Look at you," she whispered. "I always knew you'd do something great." Ethan swallowed the lump in his throat. "I wouldn't be here without you both." Keanu patted his shoulder. "Nah, man, we just gave you a push. You did the rest." The three of them stood for a moment, taking it all in. The youth center was buzzing with excitement. Kids playing, volunteers organizing, hope filling the air. Then Ethan turned to a young boy sitting alone in the corner, a look of uncertainty on his face. He walked over, crouched down, and smiled. "Hey, do you need $1?" The boy looked up, surprised. Ethan pulled out a $100 bill and placed it in his hand. "Just promise me something," he said softly. "When you grow up and see someone who needs help, do what someone once did for you." Keanu and Sandra watched from a distance, smiling, because kindness, no matter how small, has the power to change lives. The end or a new beginning. Hope you love this even longer version. Let me know if you want more.